Welcome to the Lakes Community High School Student Diversity Ambassadors panel discussion on diversity, inclusion, and equity. The Student Diversity Ambassadors started meeting a few years ago to address issues in our community, in our nation, and in the world that the group of students felt like these are things that we should be talking about. And inclusion, equity, and diversity are a few of those things that this group of students wanted to talk about and have conversations about. Tonight you will view our panel discussion. We have members from the community, we have some students, and this is an entirely student-driven event, and our students will be our facilitators for this event as well. So with no further ado, please enjoy the panel discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion put on by our Student Diversity Ambassadors.
I would like to welcome you guys all to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Ambassadors panel discussion this evening. This evening we focus on culture, and we are going to be asking each of our panelists and members of our community different questions to focus on their culture and see their insight into our community.
We'd like to start off tonight by having you all introduce yourself and briefly share your background in regard to equity, diversity, and inclusion. Ms. Barbado, if you'd like to start.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Alina Barbado, and I have two kids at Lakes Community High School. I've got a 16-year-old that's a sophomore, and I've got a 18-year-old that's going to graduate next month. And it's been a wonderful school. So I work at Rosalind Franklin University, and I am in the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And specifically, I'm the Director of Title IX Compliance, and I'm the Equity Officer. So whatever complaints come through any of our 6 colleges in regards to equity, diversity, inclusion, or Title IX violations, I handle that, and that's what I do on a daily basis. So I see a lot of different kind of cases come through from different complainants and respondents. It's always interesting, but my main goal is always to protect the students and to advance the interests of fairness and justice for our university.
All right, Ms. Cordova, would you like to go next?
Good evening. My name is Mercedes Cordova. So I am a math teacher at Lakes. This is my 3rd year at Lakes Community High School. My background in equity, so I am Latina. So I grew up in a very diverse area in Tampa, Florida. And then I moved to Libertyville, which was basically the opposite. So I had my own personal experiences with equity in a school where I didn't fit the demographic. I then went on to teach before coming to Lakes at North Chicago, again, a very diverse population. And then now I'm here at Lakes. So I've seen basically a wide spectrum of how equity is played out in different areas and different demographics. So that is my background.
Great. And then Angelina, would you like to go next?
Yeah, good evening. My name is Angelina Roman Alcocer. I'm a senior at Lakes, and I am of Latina background. I'm Puerto Rican, and that I also help at Lakes to make sure that it is a diverse and inclusive space. And whenever there's issues or problems, usually I try to help, and usually students do come to me and some other people that I know, and we usually try to help fight to make sure that Lakes is equal for all. And yeah, so that's my.
Great. And then Ms. Perrin, would you like to go next?
Oh, I think you're muted.
We are. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes.
there you go.
Yes, thank you so very much. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Sabrina Perrin. I currently have 2 students who just graduated, actually Isaiah Mackay They're alums of Lakes. So go Lakes, go Eagles. I currently have a daughter, Jada. She'll be an incoming freshman, so that's so cool. So I have a great relationship with Lakes Community High School. I am the founder of Bridge. Bridge is a place where we're building relationships in different generations every day. I have a really great way. Actually, one of the alums, Makai, actually helped us to begin Bridge. Bridge is an acronym that was given to me 16 years ago. But after the murder of George Floyd, he decided, along with some peers, that hey, we come from Evanston, which is a really diverse community. He wanted to go back to Evanston, but I mentioned to Makai, I said, hey, why don't you do something here? And within a few days, he, along with other peers, some students from Antioch and Lakes, and hundreds of peaceful demonstrators was in Antioch and decided to do a protest. Actually, more of a peaceful demonstration. Hundreds and hundreds of people were gathered there, along with our amazing police department that helped us to see our way through in the mayor. After that, I knew that Bridge, it was time for Bridge to come forward. Bridge is a place where people can express themselves, where we deal with racial reconciliation and systemic issues and equity and inclusion. We came over to Lake Villa, is where we currently are. Obviously, coming from a more of a diverse community, thus as Evanston coming to more of a predominantly white community, it was quite a change for us and for our boys as well, which were very, very scared times. However, since then, we've been able to do some amazing, amazing work for the first time in history. And we've done this will be our third year doing Juneteenth in the Round Lake, Lake Villa, Lindenhurst, Antioch area. We'll be doing it for the third year. Police forces are going to be here. So June 18th and 19th, again this year, we're going to be doing it. We've done a lot of amazing things to help build and better educate. We've done a lot of things to educate people around the systemic issues, such as giving out financial freedom to help people better understand their funds, tax talk. We currently have a conversation coming up called "Oh Yes, I Am My Hair." That is very important to understand cultural and diversity, and even with the with hair, you'll be surprised with a lot of things that has been in court regarding hair. As funny as it may seem, but we have a lot of great things going on. We currently have a building. On Waukegan, 1702 Washington Street, Waukegan. So we'll be doing our grand opening June 25th. And we have a lot of great things going on. And I just cannot wait to continue the great work we already have in store. We're also doing home buyers classes. These all deal with systemic issues because when you have a better understanding of your finances, not and a better understanding, there was a time of redlining, so we want to make sure people better understand they have their rights and understand how to get a home, right? And we're also doing a higher education this year. I'm so excited, anyone can partake. For the first time, we are having the first time of Juneteenth, we'll be giving out it'll actually go active on the 14th of April, but we're going to be giving out scholarships. So we're very excited to anyone can partake, and we'll be able to make that live. And I can leave my email information at the end. But we're doing a lot of great things to help bring people in. Our focus is bringing everyone on the same playing field so we can have the same opportunities at the same time with the same things that everyone should be able to have, like wealth, health, care, and everything else. So that's just a little bit about Bridge. So I'm happy to be here, guys.
Yeah. And lastly, Mr. Bembry, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and thank you, Principal Newberry, and all of the students and fellow panelists who are providing leadership in this important space here in our community. My name is Marvin Bembry. I'm the president of MKB Leadership Transformation. I am a retired corporate person here in this community. I've spent about 30 years in large corporations leading um, work around DEI, as well as in leadership, as well as in government affairs. I've been a lobbyist in the healthcare space. I've been a loan executive working at an HBCU in Maryland. So have a pretty eclectic background, having done a lot of things in that space. I'm a global speaker and influencer in the area of leadership and DEI. Have trained thousands of people around the world in this particular space. So, very happy to be here. Thank you.
Okay, and for our first question, what is something that is frequently overlooked or misunderstood about your culture? I think we'll circle back to Mr. Bembry. Please start us off.
Great. Thank you for that question. And I think that one of the things that is frequently, there's, I think, two things that are often overlooked when you look at someone like me who represents as Black or African American. I think there's two things. One is that I represent a monolith, right? That I represent everyone who happens to uh, have my color or my race or cultural experience. So the monolithic notion, I think, is one of the things that is often misunderstood or not um, not properly understood because Black people are as diverse as any other group of people, right? Uh, and there's so many experiences, there's so many cultures that have influence from Africa, right? And so there's just so the monolithic notion, I think, is one of the places that has been misunderstood. I think the second thing that I would like to speak to is I think it's often misunderstood the importance of historical context and the historical construct that has shaped many of our lives and has allowed us to come to life as we are. But yet, many people don't understand or even appreciate the historical construct that has actually shaped and created um, systems and infrastructure that are designed to be oppressive and not very inclusive. And you used to hear comments like, well, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? That was a very popular kind of notion some years ago. And part of that whole notion still exists today. Well, we've had a Black president, right? So, therefore there's no issues with racism, right? Now there's someone nominated to be on the Supreme Court. So everything is good. And so it's a lack of understanding of what the historical construct means juxtaposed against exceptionalism. And we have people like President Barack Obama, who is exceptional. We have the new justice, exceptional. And so there's always these exceptions that are used to try to prove a point which is devoid of understanding of the historical construct. So those would be two things that I would offer for our consideration tonight.
Thank you. I believe Gia, you're next. Thanks, Stacey.
So for Miss Piran, we have a question for you. What cultural experiences have you had that have helped you develop your understanding of equality, diversity, and inclusion?
Well, as I stated in my introduction, coming from a predominantly diverse community to a more predominantly white community, especially with younger children, I remember coming and our children, they were scared. That's the reality. And it was a cultural shock for them. They were younger, scared. I had the great opportunity of coming to the high school to meet with the assistant principal at the time. And I asked about her, about the school's culture and diversity there. And she was honest. And she said that was an area that they're working towards. That was important for me because it let me know several things that she was aware that there's a difference in the culturally. But not only was she aware, but that she knew something needed to change. So for us, it was a culture shock. However, we could have gone back because it was comfortable for us to go back to was comfortable, right? But in order to become a change and make a change, we had to stay here in this area that we weren't necessarily comfortable with. We can't assume everyone that comes is comfortable, right? Because the truth of the matter, we weren't for many reasons, but obviously that of us being me having black male boys that were African Americans in a predominantly white community, having a home. Um, so for us, culturally, I even had an incident, which is where someone came to our home, assumed we were renting the home instead of homeowners. It should not be. It was a culture shock again. However, for us, what we've decided to do, there's a saying: if you want to, you have to be the change you hope to see. And that's where we decided to stay. We began to make great relationships and been able to have conversations, especially unfortunately after the murder of George Floyd. But yet it was a wonderful time in our history because everyone was at home and we were able to have these cultural conversations. I've even been able to have for the first time in history, it was in church, huge church, Northbridge Church, and Studies Church. Studies is where I attend, predominantly white, predominantly black. For the first time, we had a baptism this past year because of that walk that came together. So culturally, we've had to endure a lot, but yet I think there's more people who are ready to hear and ready to understand and not ready to be understood, right? To better hear us, to better hear what we have to say as African Americans. So culturally, that's been a big shot, but it's been a great segue into the conversations that we have today. So that's what I'll have to say about the culturally and cultural experiences that I currently have experienced.
Yeah. Our next question is from Ms. Cordova, and it's what personal experience have you had that has helped develop your understanding of equity, diversity, and inclusion?
Yeah, so as I also mentioned in my intro, I grew up in Tampa, Florida, and where I grew up was very diverse. So I think our population was about 30% Hispanics, about 30-ish percent white, and then about like 20 something percent African American. And then there was the only thing that didn't represent very much was the Asian population. And then high school, I moved to Libertyville. So I think when I started Libertyville, it was 90% white, a 91% white. Um, and growing up, like I knew about racism, but I never like understood racism, and I never understood like prejudice versus racism. And when I went to Libertyville, it was very hard just as a culture shock, trying to fit in, seeing where I belonged. I was called the Mexican girl. I'm not Mexican, I'm Puerto Rican. And people, you speak Mexican and everything. I just never felt like I was included in the community. So it took some time. I found other friends who were also of the diverse population. So I mainly hung out with Hispanics or African Americans. Um, People didn't expect a person like me to be going to Marquette University and everything. So it's like, oh, are you going to CLC? Like that was their assumption, which is not like a bad thing to go to community college, but it was the thing that they assumed. They didn't assume that I was going to a 4-year university. They didn't assume that I was getting good grades in school. Like it was the stereotype that kind of followed me all the way through. So going then to teach at North Chicago, I just felt like we needed more teachers, more color, because they needed to see that other people could do it too. And North Chicago was, I think, 67-ish percent Hispanic. So them being able to see like, oh, I can do it. I can go to a 4-year university, I felt like was very important. And I just grew such a strong bond with my students, like as a role model. And I just feel like that's what Lakeville needs. That's what schools that are not as diverse need. They need to see people of color in higher positions and know that I can do it too. I don't need to feel like I have these lower standards. Like, so, I mean, that's the main goal. And I see Lake Villa trying, and I do see like my Hispanic population in Lake Villa, like clinging to me and like, oh, sharing experiences with me. So it just feels good to feel like I can make a difference in that sense.
Yeah. All right. And next for Angelina, what does equity, diversity, and inclusion mean to you as a student?
Hi, can you repeat that again for me because my Wi-Fi cut out and I couldn't hear you guys. I'm sorry.
All right, no problem. What does equity, diversity, and inclusion mean to you as a student?
To me, diversity, equity, and inclusion means that everyone has the same opportunity. Everyone has the same opportunity to do anything they would like. Like in a classroom and for assignments, like there was a problem with an assignment, I believe it was last year, where it's like it was asking a question about slavery and like, oh, is it okay if this happened, or like if this was not a thing, like would like, and asking like basically saying that if slavery was okay, or like if slavery was still a thing now, like how would you deal with it or something like that. And a lot of people felt that this wasn't a correct question to ask on an assignment because, well, it wasn't, it would, I'm sorry, I'm nervous. This is my first time being a panelist. But the question, if I'm remembering correctly, because it was a long time ago, but it was like, it was a question that shouldn't have been a question on an assignment. And it was a question that was only given to this one specific history class, and it was not a good question. And we were trying to find a way of like asking the teacher why was this a question. They're like, oh, it was fine, it was just for this assignment. And we want to make sure to crack down on like people understanding that even if you find it okay, it's not okay. Like even if you think like, oh, this is a fine question just because it like doesn't cross a certain border, it's just like anything around the topic of topics of slavery, of like, oh, like was it okay, or like, oh, was it like this, it's just is not okay. And it's like you have to remember to, when you're teaching, that people are absorbing your knowledge and what you're teaching them, and that you have to teach in a way that you teach about the subject because you need to learn about slavery and that how it was a wrong thing, but not leaving it open to interpretation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. Very well put. Stacy?
Yeah. So we're gonna move to Miss Barbados. We have the same question for you. What does equity, diversity, inclusion mean to you as a parent or teacher?
Sure. I've been working in this field for about 30 years. When I first got my law degree and passed the bar, one of the first things I did was work for our public defender. And I represented one of the cases that I felt was one of the most important cases in our county. Was a young Black man who was pulled over because he was profiled. It turns out that they had obtained some illegal evidence that really didn't amount to much, but here he was in court, and he was pulled over illegally in violation of his constitutional rights. And I took it to trial because I knew it was wrong, and the charges were dismissed, and it gave the prosecutors, and it gave our local police department something to think about the next time that they, would consider doing something like that. And that was my sort of one of my first, forays into this back in the 90s. And I've always felt that this work was very important. And I've never stopped working in that field. I've done different things since then. But this has always been the pressing issue for me. As life moved on, I worked in different areas. Most recently, right now, I'm a Title IX and an ADA coordinator, which means I focus a lot on the federal prohibition of sexual discrimination and sexual misconduct in an educational setting. Now, a lot of people don't realize that this has been applying to everyone on this panel since kindergarten. This is something that has been there for everybody's benefit, but hardly ever used. back in the 70s when this law was first passed, it was called the Sports Equity Law, because it meant that if there was a sport that there was a man's team on, there would have to be an equal sort of expenditure for a woman's team. So you started getting women's softball teams and women's basketball teams and things like that. And that's where it first started coming out in 1972. And it's really developed a lot since then. And it's providing more and more protections for everybody for any kind of discrimination based on sex. Um, the other kind of protections that I fight for are for people of disabilities. A lot of times when you hear the word disability, you think of somebody in a wheelchair or a cane, or somebody who's visibly disabled. What I think a lot of people in the public don't realize is that not all disabilities are visible. There is a huge amount of anxiety and depression in our society right now, and those are disabilities, which require accommodations and educational settings. And part of what I do is make sure that those students get those accommodations that they need in order to be successful. Likewise, for women who are pregnant or parenting. Um, and then, as my work as an equity officer, there's a whole host of what are legally considered statuses that could suffer some abuses, and I make sure that those folks are protected as well. And that list of protected statuses is just about any kind of status you can imagine. One of the most important ones is race, ethnicity, religion. Those are some of the most important ones that we make sure that students, staff, employees are not prejudiced in that way.
Thank you. Our next question is for Mr. Bembry, and it's, what advice would you have for others who may be experiencing some of the same challenges you've had over the years?
Thank you for that question. I would say that the most important advice that I could give people is the personal work, the personal development that has to happen for me, for you, for each one of us. Because if I can grow and deal with me, then I can deal with anything on the outside of me. So I would say my advice would be to be intentional about your personal growth. Growth doesn't just happen. You have to be intentional about it. You must know yourself in order to grow yourself. So be intentional about learning about who you are, learning about your strengths, your areas of development, learning about your triggers, the things that get you off kilter. The second thing is I would say is work on continually understanding your history, the history of your family, the history of people that are like you, and validate yourself, affirm yourself, make it. I'm an executive coach, and part of the work that I do is dealing with people who are trying to become better versions of themselves. And one of the things that often, something that I will say at times is, I can tell you great things about yourself, but the one that you'll listen to the most is yourself. And so you have to work on your self-talk in terms of validating yourself and who you are and so forth. The third thing that I would say is develop a vision, a compelling vision for yourself. In other words, you develop the vision for yourself as opposed to allowing others to develop a vision for you. Because if you can develop your own vision for yourself, then what regardless of what anybody else says, whatever anyone does to marginalize you or to tell you that you can't do something, you have a compelling vision of your own future and you can see yourself there. And then the fourth thing and the final thing that I would say is create an inner circle of people who are bigger, better, faster, stronger than you, and ensure that that inner circle is comprised of diverse people. See, generally, our circle of trust tends to look like us. It tends to look like us in terms of factors of race and ethnicity and culture and gender and where we went to school and so forth. But if you're intentional about personal growth, if you're intentional about validating yourself, if you're intentional about affirming yourself, then I would suggest that you also be intentional about creating an inner circle of diverse people who are bigger, better, faster, stronger than you. And the gravitational pull from that will help you surmount any kind of difficulty you might face. Thank you.
No, thank you. And this next one is for Ms. Perrin, and that would be, what changes can we enact to foster a better sense of inclusion and acceptance for a variety of cultures in our community?
Well, one, to open ourselves up to listen. I think listening skills is wonderful in any relationship. Being able to listen, to better understand, as I mentioned, than to be understood. Um, when we're dealing and understand and embrace the differences, it's okay to be different, right? It's okay to have those. But when you have different ethnicities, culture, backgrounds, it's imperative that we begin to understand that everyone is not the same, even within our own culture. My experience as a Black African American woman is going to be different than another woman that may live in a different area. For example, I lived in Evanston, but then the one that may live in a more of a even more of a hostile environment is going to be different. Understanding that there's differences, but also being able to begin to have a conversation, because I think what happens is when there's a lack, I can't get away from the fact of conversation. When you get away, that's why it's important to keep these conversations going. One of my challenges I had a chance to do Be the Bridge. It was a book, Be the Bridge, that I did with North Bridge Church, and we did it. Everything was great, but I said the conversation can't stop. We have to continue it, not just when problem arises. We have to continue it, and also be willing to. I love the fact of having my board as a representation of what the community we're going to serve. They have all walks of background, and I think that's so critical. I think I've heard that resounded throughout this on tonight, having the diversity, because then you get a better understanding of, you may be doing. I was speaking to a young lady who was I think she's Jamaican. And in their culture, sometimes the communication is differently. Even as an African American woman, I was unaware of that. So I've done something, I said something, it was offensive because I didn't know. Had I had the opportunity to sit around, now I know better, we can do better. So some of the changes it's going to take, I love like that man in the mirror, as Bunbury was speaking to, kind of like yourself. I have to check myself, look in the mirror and say, where can I be better? Because at the end of the day, I can only change me. And when we're going to a society, whether in school, at work, or anywhere you're going, you have to be responsible for you and educating yourself. Educating yourself enough to care about your community. I'm currently, our organization is now in a predominantly Spanish area in Waukegan. Now I'm learning that community, right? Because I don't have all of the answers. So I don't want to assume that everyone understands me, and they shouldn't assume that I understand their culture. Opening oneself up, being open, being ready, educate yourself, learning. These can definitely, and take on your own responsibility of learning culture. One of the greatest things I've had, yes, I think maybe even Mr. Bunbury spoke to this earlier when he said he can't speak for every African American male. Absolutely correct, and nor should he have to, and nor should anyone have to speak for their whole culture or ethnicity. No one should have to speak to that for everyone. So really, I think it takes everyone who can play a part, whether your children Teach the children in your home. Teach them in their homes. And the students, you guys have a major role to play. We all have a circle of influence. And if something's been said or done that is offensive, you have a responsibility to speak on that behalf. And if you don't know what to speak, ask an adult, a trusted voice. I always like to listen to trusted voices. And when you know it doesn't sit right, then it's not right. You never know what anyone is going through. So really begin to make yourselves accountable. You're never too young or too old to make yourself accountable, take action, take initiative, and do your getting educated for yourself. So I think that changes a lot of prejudices because their prejudice comes from ignorance, lack of knowledge, not knowing, and not caring to know. So I think that's critical. As I reflect back, as I stated earlier, the honesty and be honest. The principal, she was honest. No, this is where we're lacking here. I was okay with that because it let me know she understood there's a place that was time to grow. And I believe we all have an opportunity to learn and grow and take action and walk together. But do it. I'm big on love. I really am. Love, love, love. But at the end of the day, we have to understand everyone may not see the way you see things, and that's okay too. All you can do is do what you need to do and educate yourself.
Thank you. So now I have a question for Ms. Cordova. From a high school teacher's perspective, what changes can District 117 enact to foster a better sense of inclusion and acceptance within our community?
Yeah, so I think one thing that Lakes really tries to do, but I think with diversity and equity could do better, is allowing the students to share their culture, share their like backgrounds, everything. I know like we have the Gay Straight Alliance that has occasional flyers that go around, occasional topics, but I feel like unless you're part of that group, unless you check your daily announcements, which we know students do not do, you don't really hear much about it. Like I feel like there has to be just more sharing. I know one thing that I loved about North Chicago is they had assemblies once in a while. So we had an assembly for Hispanic Heritage Month, we had an assembly for Black History Month, and it's just like a way to share to the whole school. Even something like doing things in EN where we know, sorry, where we know that the kids are watching it in class because the teachers are playing for it for them. It just, I feel like it doesn't happen enough. I feel like kids don't look at the flyers, kids don't check their emails. There needs to be a better way of spreading culture in the school and spreading diverse ideas in the school. And it has to be from people who share those backgrounds in the school. It has to come from students who feel like my voice should be heard. I want to share my experience because that's what helps with inclusion too. I feel like being part of a minority group, what made me feel more comfortable in Libertyville was joining student ambassadors and just having little projects to do around the school. It's all about involvement, and it's hard to be involved when you're nervous, when you feel like you don't like you're not involved. Like there has to be something that pulls kids in and tells them it's okay. It's okay to take risks. It's okay to join groups and have people that have the same mindset as them. Like it's okay, you know, I'm here with you. I also feel nervous. I also feel like I don't belong. Let's share our experiences with each other.
Yeah, thank you. Our next question is for Angelina, and it's very similar to Miss Cordova's question, but from the point of view of a high schooler at Lakes, what changes can District 117 enact to foster a better sense of inclusion and acceptance for a variety of cultures in our community?
Thank you for the question. I'm not sure if I can put it any better than Miss Perrin and Miss Cordova have put it, but like Miss Cordova said, that showing different cultures and different ethnicities and backgrounds and showing where you're from and helping to understand people as individuals and different cultures would definitely help Lakes become more inclusive. And to add on to what Ms. Cordova said, having a culture day would be something I think would be something great that we could do, because I've been seeing it done at other schools where people show off their own heritage or their own culture like during a day, and we can just take like half a day or an assembly day and do that as well. And then to bounce off what Miss Perrion said, that the to sorry so to just make sure that we listen and that we understand and enforce that when you do something wrong, to hold people accountable. Because I have reported multiple incidences at Lakes of inequity and different circumstances that have happened that are not okay. And I've reported them, and they said, and I've come back because the incidences actually kept happening later on in other years. And I was very upset because it felt that whatever they had done, it hadn't fit what they had changed. Because they told me, of course, that they're not allowed to tell me what happened, like what the courses of action were. But I just want some sort of change in those courses of action and make sure that those people are held accountable, and it creates some sort of change. Because something they were saying that the people were held accountable, but I didn't see any change because the events kept occurring. So yes, that would be my piece.
Okay, well then we're going to move on to Mr. Bembry. What cultural experiences have you had that have helped develop your understanding of equity, diversity, and inclusion?
Thanks for that question. One is my own lived experience. I happened to grow up in the city of Detroit, and happened to grow up in a pretty volatile time in the civil rights movement here in this country, and so I was affected by just the time in which I grew up. And in the 60s, being alive and as a child, seeing the impact of the riots in Detroit, shaped my perspective. Just hearing the language that was being used, the nomenclature to describe experiences of Black people and so forth. So I have that contextual lived experience as a person of color, and when in my case, and I reasoned some things as a child, and my reasoning was pretty simplistic. It wasn't that deep. It was, I don't know why people should be prejudiced against other people, because no one has anything to do with the color of their skin, right? That was my simplistic reasoning. And so hearing the drama, the talk, the Dr. King speeches, and all of those kinds of things that were happening, it didn't make sense to me, because why should anyone have any kind of animus against someone because of the color of their skin, since no one has anything to do with the color of their skin, right? That was my reasoning. And in my case, there was no ambiguity as to who I was, right? There was no passing or anything like that. It was pretty obvious of who I was. So that was one element of my experience. And also, an element of my experience was that the shade of Black that I am also presented itself with not only but intra cultural challenges as well. Again, made no sense, right? Because no one had anything to do with the color of their skin. So I lived that. And then growing up and uh, uh, living in poverty and child of a single parent and all of those kinds of things that have in some cases stereotypically created a narrative, all that represented. I was very fortunate early, not long after my corporate career started, to really have an opportunity to get involved in this work and to be involved in this work of learning and growing myself and teaching and training others. And so I learned through that process as well. Uh, I've also been very fortunate to be able to travel and to speak and to be on or connect to five of the world's 7 continents. So travel has expanded my view and helped me to understand and to contextualize some things as well. So that's some of the things that have helped shaped my perspective about DEI. I might also mention that I have another one, and that's a faith component. As a person of faith, then I'm also grounded in my faith with regard to this very same subject. And my faith helps me to also realize that when we create barriers based on some artificial designations, that's immoral, that's not good either. So all of that, both my childhood experiences, my corporate experiences, my travel, as well as my faith, have informed kind of my worldview in this space.
You want to jump back?
Oh, yeah, let's jump back to her.
All right. If Ms. Barbado, if you are ready, what are the post-secondary education institutions doing to support equity, inclusion, and diversity for their students, and what impact do you feel that this will have on the future of our country?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's more and more that's being done today. Ms. Perrin mentioned it earlier, and that was the death of George Floyd in 2020. Ever since that point in time, a lot of post-secondary educational institutions are answering the call and really upping their diversity, equity, and inclusion requirements. Now, I mean, DEI has always existed in these institutions, but almost in name only. The actual work that was done in the name of DEI wasn't enough to even begin to address the amount of work that needed to be done to bring justice to those who needed it. And again, unfortunately, as Ms. Perrin has so eloquently said, unfortunately, post mortem George Floyd, a lot of action is starting to be taken. So, take for example the institution I'm in right now at Rosalind Franklin. They did an entire study, wrote a 26-page report, and completely restructured their university and the 6 colleges contained therein, so that there's somebody on each college that answers to DEI work. Now, by the colleges, I mean, so Rosalind Franklin University is the entire place itself, but within it we have the College of Medicine, the College of Podiatry, pharmacy school, nursing school, etc. And each of those individual colleges have someone on there that answers to DEI work. We've got pipeline. We're about to hire somebody who does pipeline work. What do I mean by pipeline work? So we have fantastic research that shows that the experience of an African American student in school completely differs from the experience of a white person in school. What do I mean by that? So, an example of that is disciplinary actions. So, let's say an African American young man throws a piece of paper, and the teacher sees it and says that that student's disrespectful, that student is getting a detention, and the treatment goes that way. Now you compare it or just juxtapose it with a white student throws a piece of paper. Oh, he just accidentally threw it, or just having some fun. No detention, no disciplinary action. This is real research that we have, statistically speaking, where the Black students get put into a place where, because of disciplinary action and because of lack of support, lack of mentorship, they go into what's called a pipeline that ends up in correctional facilities. And that's another huge point in the United States, where we have more African American males in our correctional facilities than we do of any other ethnicity. And so what they're saying is it's a pipeline, and it begins in the school system. So how do we correct that? We have to correct it at its roots, where it begins, how we treat these students, how they grew up believing about themselves. And Mr. Bembry's referred to that as well. What do you think about yourself? How do you believe in yourself? Well, we're constantly given an image of who we are from our society. You are this, you are that, you can do this, you can't do that. So these students are being given an image of themselves from their very own school, from the age of kindergarten on. Okay. And so, what a lot of institutions are doing and should be doing is what's called pipeline work, where we go to the beginning and we start working with these students to make the changes that's necessary. So, instead of the pipeline ending up in a correctional facility, the pipeline ends up in medical school or a 4 year institution or a master's degree or anything like that that will create success and happiness and justice for everybody in our society. That position is open right now at Rosalind Franklin. We're hiring for it. So these are real changes that our institution has begun and other institutions as well. I previously was at College of Lake County, and we just hired someone working directly under our vice president, who is the executive director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So a lot of institutions are finally starting to take this work seriously and hiring people who will make those changes that are necessary to keep an eye on the students of color that are there, to support them, to mentor them, and then to go out into the community. It's nothing is ever solved by just one thing, especially when it's an issue like this that has its roots so deep and it's so pervasive. So you've got to hit it at so many different angles. So we not only have to support the students that exist right now, but we've got to go out to our communities and start talking with the high schoolers, the preschoolers, the middle schoolers, the teachers, and start saying, hey, these changes need to happen. We need to support these students. We need to uplift these students so that they end up in this, medical institution as a student rather than in the correctional institution as an inmate.
Thank you. We're gonna move to Miss Perrin. How have some others shown ignorance, indifference, or insensitivity to, or outright oppression towards your culture, identification, or diversity characteristics? And what have you said or done in response?
Okay, well, I can talk about that freely. Going into a store, let's start there. Just going inside of a simple store. Um, I could say, first, let me start off, that's just been, unfortunately, the history of African Americans. It doesn't matter what area you've come from, it doesn't matter, just African American history of African Americans. Being followed around in the store, assuming that you're there to steal or bring harm, assuming you don't have the money to go into a luxury store. And I find that in most of the stores, I'm asked more than anyone else, can I help you? Can I help you? Stop asking me, can you help me? You can help me by leaving me alone, right? It's frustrating, but I'm always reminded because they're always looking. And I say that because as soon as I step outside of who I know to be in my professional self, then I would get the police called or I will be looked upon as causing trouble. Educated woman, never been to jail, never even smoked a cigarette, right? Have the money to pay for it. Another example, someone coming to our home assuming that we're renting if we didn't purchase it because we live in the area of predominantly white. And our again, my charge to anyone and everyone, as I did myself, I had to take a step back because I'm human. Then I had to address it, letting the individual know where they erred. I think that's critical. You cannot be afraid to address it. Now, there are times you may have to go back to address it because, again, there's the situations where it can arise and it could cause you to feel emotionally. We always, I know I have, as an African American woman, always have to double think. I have to tell my boys, double think. When I send my boys out or my daughter out, even when it comes to any, whether the cops or community, society, just take a step back. Double think. You have to think harder and respond. Even you have to be able to respond in a different manner, no matter what, because it's always going to seem aggression. As I believe it was Miss Barbado who just stated about throwing. Was that you that talked about throwing, or was that Cordova throwing the paper versus a white? It was Miss Barbado throwing the paper, a black boy versus a white boy. It's always seen as aggression. And one of the things I have to make mention too, we cannot negate the fact, or we cannot get away with the fact that there's been historic oppression that's been on the people, which when the mother is born, think back even in slavery, when the mother is born to the unborn child, that same emotion she felt even to the unborn child now is given to that baby in the womb before it even comes out into the world. Then you have the history of the oppression going over and over and over again. That's ignorance, because when you don't understand the cultural differences, you don't understand the areas where one may have had come from a harder area, or even just the history of our DNA. It's automatically ignorance when you don't understand, because in schools they don't understand that. I recall being in school, I never understood why all the black boys seemed to be in this one bad class. We used to call them the bad class, and they would get rewarded if they were good. They would be able to go on trips and stuff. I never, in my young mind, never understood that. I didn't, until one day I was speaking to one of the black boys in the class, and his grades were good, but because he came from a family who had been dealing with poverty, who couldn't know if they were going to be able to live, he began to weep, a young boy. But they didn't understand. So culturally, and then being able to tell someone, this is where we need to be better. I love that this young lady, Angelina, stated she made some reports. What are we going to do about those reports that this young lady is given? I don't know what's all the content around it, but my point is, thank you, young lady, for saying something, even if you don't understand it all. She took the initiative to make a report, and she stated, have people accountable. We have to continue to hold people accountable. We have to hold everyone who's in the community accountable to their actions. So therefore, we have to continue to speak on these areas, and guess what? We need everyone to help. Because the truth of the matter is, slavery in 1865 and freedom, all these things did not take place, not just because of one culture, but to groups of people to help move forward what we are today. And we're seeing things being put in place that is now coming to, even when it comes down systemically. I love you talking, Ms. Barbara talk about the pipeline. These are things that I feel we should have been doing, but somebody had to begin to speak on it, talk about it, raise a concern about it, and raise an awareness about it, and begin to educate and begin to do something. So in the end of the day, there's a lot of ignorance that's in all of our cultures, I'm sure, and ethnicities and backgrounds, because we assume everybody is the same, and everyone is not the same. However, you have to get educated, but we also need those voices that's going to help further and help push systems to a different place, help push legislation to a different place, help push many things to a different place. And we need help, because the truth of the matter is, ignorance is not knowing and not being aware, or not choosing to know, and not having the education around to know. But it's our job to put it forefront, keep it going. After this conversation today, it is my hope that something else is continuing. Even during summertime, something else needs to continue, because it's not enough just to have a one and done. We have to continue in our community first, then we can spread abroad around to everyone else. So I believe just these little changes. And oh, by the way, you can make a difference, and you are a difference. Angelina, you making a difference. You're making a difference. You're taking a stand. Being here today to say, students, LCHS, you're making a difference. Asking these questions. You have a part to play. You're not too young to play a part, because it's a responsibility. Because the truth of the matter is, it took my son, who, along with other peers, came out. He said, he whispered in my ear when he seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. He says, Mom, I'm scared. I said, I'm scared too. But he said, I know I got to do something. And he did something. And now we have Bridge, and we're doing great work, and we are excited. But ignorance is there. It probably always be there, but to little by little, somebody say, how you eat an elephant? I don't even eat elephants. I don't know where that came from. But they say little bite at a time, a little bit at a time. Because we have an elephant, but we need to address that there's an elephant in the room. And it's step by step, little by little. So that will be my response.
Yeah, thank you. Our next question's for Ms. Cordova, and it's what advice would you have for others who may be experiencing some of the same challenges you've had over the years?
So I think one of the hardest things to do is to assume ignorance and not malice. And for the exact reason that Ms. Perrin just said, as a person of color, when you respond to something, they take it as aggression if it's against their thoughts. So you want to make sure that you're understanding that it's not coming from a place of hate, or assuming that it's not coming from a place of hate, assuming it comes from a place of ignorance. They are not educated in your cultural background. They don't know, they just assume stereotypes because, again, like people are not born with these prejudiced thoughts, they learn them. People are born, like, I know on George Floyd's death, I had to explain to my daughter, who's Puerto Rican and Mexican, what racism was in general. She had no idea. She was in kindergarten when it happened, and she was so confused as to why people were protesting and why did this guy that she doesn't know death all over the news. Like, she was very confused, and I had to explain to her, you know, some people judge others based on the color, and she was so confused. She was like, but why? And I was like, I don't know why. I'm like, it's just something that's been going on forever. And people even, and I know there's even been studies like, even if people are of the same race and have the same hair color, same eye color, they will find something different to judge people on. And it's just having to combat that, knowing that it exists, and just making sure that you're educating people, not arguing with people, not fighting with people, but just educating with people, or educating people to understand, this is my culture, this is how I feel, this is what you said that offends me, and having them grow and hopefully open up their minds to correct their behavior. Because it's going to start with one person, and that person's going to say it to another person, and it's going to spread that way. But when you address something in a tone where it seems aggressive, even if it's not aggressive, then people get aggressive back, and then they get defensive. And that's why we have this huge fight between just different backgrounds going on in the world right now. And some people just are so fixated on the fact that, no, what you're doing is wrong, you shouldn't be protesting, you know, you're being aggressive, even if they're not understanding where the root of that problem is. So it's just all comes with educating people and doing so in a way that people will listen.
Okay, thank you. Angelina, this next one is for you. What cultural experiences have you had as a student that have helped you to develop your understanding of equity, diversity, and inclusion?
So I could talk about a lot of things, but I think something that has impacted me a lot in and how I understand equity, diversity, and inclusion would be when I moved here to Lindenhurst, Illinois. When I would say 4 or 5, and before that I was born in Puerto Rico, and I lived in Puerto Rico until I was about 4 or 5. When I moved here and I started going to my kindergarten and my first grade school and everything, I realized that everyone looked different than me. Everyone had a slighter, like more white, lighter skin tone than me. Their hair wasn't as curly, like mine isn't curly right now, but usually my hair was pretty curly back then. Like when I would take my lunch to school, everyone would be like, ew, what's that? When they had their peanut butter and jelly with them at lunch. And I would have arroz con pollo, which my mom would make for me. And I would be like, ew, that smells weird, or ew, that's that. And now looking back at it, it's just children being children. But when in that moment, I felt so hurt because something that I loved, other people found disgusting, even though they didn't understand. And now I come from a place that it's just people didn't understand, and it's what kids are taught. Kids don't inherently know that or inherently think that. It's just what kids are taught. And so yeah, that's helped me in like understanding equality and diversity, and helping that representation does matter. Seeing people that look like you around you does matter in your development. Like in my development, it would have helped so much in seeing around all these people, oh my god, there's someone who understands what I'm going through, there's someone who understands what's happening to me in school right now. And yeah, and I would say that that's something that's very much impacted my understanding of diversity and inclusion and equity.
Thank you.
All right, Stacy, do you want a closing statement? I think we've been at this about an hour.
Yeah, sure. You want to go through the panelists and have them say their closing thing first?
Alright. So thank you for joining us today. If I will go around once more and just what you thought overall of this panel, and if there's any final points that came up during discussion that you didn't get to share, Ms. Barbado, we'll start with you, please.
Yeah, just thank you so much again for having this panel. I think it's great that you're making this issue important for the school and that the students have had this experience. So congratulations to all the students involved. I think you've done a wonderful job and I hope you keep doing it. And if you want to expand this work, let me know. I'm happy to help out and do whatever needs to be done. Yeah, in closing, I would just say, again, I think Miss Perrin's already mentioned what Angelina did, but when I get to the age that I'm at right now, a lot of my life, I feel like it's hard to name something. When you see something happening, it's hard to name it if you can't put a name to it. But if you see something happening and your gut says it's not right, it's not right, it's not going to change. Bullies don't stop unless you make them stop. And nothing changes unless you name it and say this needs to be changed and this needs to stop. And I guess even most recently, I've decided personally, whenever I see something happening, I've got to say something. If somebody's treating somebody inappropriately or abusively or discriminately, you've got to say something. And it starts with your next door neighbors or your friends or your relatives, whoever it is that's around you. Just don't let things go. And I know it's human nature to not make trouble. It really is, because we all just want to get through the day. We want to get to the next things that we can sit down and watch our favorite show at the end of the day and with hardly any hassles. But you know what? If one of us suffers, all of us suffers. And we can't have a just and happy and content society if there is anybody that's suffering due to discrimination or hate or anything that we can change. So we have to do the work. And it's just like being a good parent. You put the work in the front, and then hopefully, you've got something good in the end. Unless you put the work in right now, nothing's going to change. And we can't keep deluding ourselves and saying that everything's fine, things are working fine, our society's fine. Imagine how much better our society would be if everybody was lifted up, if everybody was respected, if everybody's viewpoints were, respected and felt like it was important. We would be making so much more money. We would all be so much more productive. We would be all so much happier. Our society would be completely different. So again, if one is down, we're all down. If we're all good, we're all good. And that's the goal for our society, in my opinion.
Thank you. Ms. Cordova, over to you, please.
Yeah, I mean, I love what Miss Barbado said. Like, I feel like we need to set those high standards. We need to expect behavior. I do think it's going to take time, but I feel like doing things like this, setting awareness, is definitely a good step in the right direction. As Ms. Perrin said earlier, I'm hopeful that, there will be more ideas to come and more ways to make kids feel included in the school. But I really do appreciate just having something like this and like a building, building station for what's to hopefully come. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Bembry, please.
Thank you. First of all, let me just commend you, students, Principal Newberry, and the district for the work that you're doing, not just tonight, but having been able to be a part and have a front row seat to some of the things that you have done over the last several years, especially with my view, is just commendable. I've talked about Lakes a number of times and the progressive leadership that the administration is providing, as well as the students. I've taught literally thousands of people around the world, and some of the students that I've engaged with at Lakes could easily be in some of my classes with adults and add so much value. So I just want to commend you all for this particular work. Let me close by just saying this. Uh, I'm part of the John Maxwell team, and so I teach leadership. And John says something that I think is really important, and that is this: leadership is influence. Leadership is not title, rank, or position, but leadership is influence. So I just want to challenge you that are on this panel, and those of you that are there at Lakes, and the community which may observe this videotape at some point. Lead in this space. Leadership is influence, and every one of us have a place and an opportunity of influence. Every one of us have an opportunity to make a difference in our space. Everyone's not going to be on the front, on television and being a talking head, but every one of us can add value to this work by influencing those around us, but first influencing ourselves and then influencing others. So, to the school district, uh, may I just say, continue the great work that you're doing. To those that are part of the infrastructure, the hiring process, may I just challenge you, continue to aggressively recruit and develop talent, diverse talent. Angelina, you said it so well, and it would help in your development to have seen people who look like you, who have the same context as you. Um, Ms. Cordova spoke about how that made a difference at North Chicago High School with those students to see someone who shared a similar experience. So, to the district, continue to aggressively recruit and develop talent, develop the pipeline, as Ms. Barbado said earlier. Um, Continue to articulate the vision, and then finally, continue to hold people accountable for creating the culture that we are espousing in these kinds of settings. So, good work, folks. Thank you so much. It's been an honor to be a part of this team tonight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bembry. Ms. Perrin, if you will, please.
Yes, I can just second to everyone what everyone have already stated. You guys are amazing. I am so proud of you to be here. I'm so proud of the professionalism. I'm proud of the questions. I'm very excited, and I too, as I mentioned, I have alums of Lakes, and I seen coming through the school how it is changing. I'm seeing more of the Black people or people of color, whatever way you choose to decide politically. I'm gonna say Black folks because that's who I am. But I do see that, and I'm hoping to see more diversity, Latino and any other ethnicity or background or culture continue to go forward within, because that is absolutely true. I do want to say this in my final remarks. I get more frustrated when I'm hearing about the DEI and just is given to anyone. It takes it's a position that needs to be a position, not an addition to what you're already doing. Because as I know, I do not work because I'm taking on a position that is constant. I'm constantly working on racial reconciliation. I'm constantly bringing in things and helping bringing in education. We only have a one household. I'm not saying that's for everyone, because as a believer, that's my calling. I don't have I don't have the story of I thought of this far as doing this exactly the same way. But I will say this for those of you out there, whether it's school or in your jobs, hire someone that has the ability, the time, and make that a position for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Too often, I've heard people say, "Well, I'm HR, but plus I have to do this." It takes a special person. I think taking the time to seek those individuals out to help bring along and progress what needs to continue on, that's critical. So I want to challenge not only the schools, but anyone that might be listening or get this opportunity to hear this, to really seek that out. But I'm very excited. I'm here. I'm in the community. If anybody have any questions, I can leave my information with you guys later or whenever you want. But I'm here to help, and I just want to avail myself. But students, you guys are doing a great job, and thank you, Principal Newberry. Thank you, thank you for what you've done already, and what I know that you're going to continue to leave a legacy to do. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Angelina, please.
So everyone's put it very well before me. I just want to say thank you for letting me be on this panel today, and for having the ability to speak and to be that voice for the students and be that voice to help start the change, because change doesn't happen overnight. So I would just like to say thank you for that opportunity. And this is my last year at Lakes. I'm going to be graduating in about a month. So it's good to know that there are people behind me that are working towards continuing to have diversity and inclusion and equity at Lakes, and continuing to make it an active issue that's being solved, and there's active solutions and things are being done. So yeah, that's all I had to say.
Thank you all for joining us tonight, and for those who will be listening after. Today we've gathered around and have asked you all these different questions about you and your culture and your community, and we appreciate all your thorough responses that can help enlighten and educate others in our community along with our school. I would also like to thank my two friends, Gia and Hannah, here today, because I joined diversity when I was a freshman and was here with two seniors who have graduated now, and with these guys' help and younger knowledge too, we have been able to recreate this panel discussion tonight, and I hope we get to do it in the future. We'd also like to thank Mr. Newberry for helping us with all of this, and thank you all for attending tonight.
Thank you for taking the time to view the Student Diversity Ambassadors panel discussion. I want to thank the panelists for helping us out and having the courage to be involved in this conversation, and also our students for facilitating this conversation. We will continue to have these conversations at Lakes Community High School, as we feel it does a lot to build the community that we like to have for our students here at Lakes Community High School. If you have any questions regarding this panel discussion, please reach out to me, Mr. Newberry, at Lakes Community High School. Thank you.